In June 1989, a relatively low-ranking cleric named Ali Khamenei stood before a somber assembly of experts and pleaded with them not to make him the supreme leader of Iran. In a leaked video that would remain hidden for decades, the man who has spent years in the Shah's prisons and on the front lines of the Iran-Iraq war looked genuinely shaken, telling the room of elderly jurists that his nomination would make them cry tears of blood, because he lacked the religious standing to lead. It was a moment of profound clerical modesty, or perhaps calculated political theater, engineered by his ally, Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, who convinced the assembly that a temporary leader was better than none at all. That day, in a quiet room filled with the scent of rosewater and rustle of ropes, the accidental leader became a 37-year reign that would transform the Islamic Republic into a regional titan, trading his early humility for an iron-willed doctrine of perpetual resistance. Fast forward to the pre-dawn silence of February 28, 2026, where the same man, now 86, and the absolute Iron Rabar sat in a fortified compound that had become the geographic heart of the Shia world. The transition that began with a soft-spoken debate in a council chamber ended not with a consensus of cleric, but with the terrifying, efficient logic of modern war. While the regime's radars were still reporting clear skies, tricked by a ghost code that simply deleted the incoming American and Israeli jet from reality, the 37-year era of the second supreme leader vanished in a single surgical heartbeat. Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Marianne, and on this channel I talk about geopolitical power shifts, strategic competition, and the forces reshaping world affairs. On February 28, 2026, the US and Israel launched preemptive strikes against Iran. It occurred in a continuation of tensions with Iran around its determination to get nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, and as peace negotiations in Geneva were failing. This war didn't happen in a vacuum. It was triggered after years of rising tensions over Iran's ambition to develop ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. Iran had positioned itself as the enemy of both Israel and the US, openly threatening both countries. During his first mandate, Trump revoked the accord negotiated by Barack Obama with Iran that would have provided a path for the country to obtain civil nuclear energy and economic development, but without nuclear weapons. This led Iran on the path of confrontation with the US. As I mentioned, tensions with Iran had been mounting for years to reach a boiling point recently. This was coupled to the fact that reports starting surfacing in mid-January 2026 that top generals, including Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, were reportedly horrified by the Greenland Directive aiming to build an invasion plan of Greenland, as invading a NATO ally would effectively end the alliance and trigger a constitutional crisis. Sources cited in the Daily Mail and the Washington Post indicated that officials began presenting a more robust option for Iran, specifically targeting its nuclear facilities and military leadership infrastructures, as a way to distract the president with a more traditional adversary. While the Pentagon was using Iran to distract the president from Greenland, Israel was running its own play to ensure that if a war happened, it would not be a half measure they felt they were forced into during the 12 Days War in June 2025. By threatening to go against Iran alone, Netanyahu forced Trump into a corner. Either join a coordinated, overwhelming strike or deal with the chaotic regional fallout of a unilateral Israeli strike that would inevitably drag US bases into the crossfire anyway. And this all led to the US Operation Epic Fury and Israel Operation Roaring Lion that launched massive coordinated strikes on Tehran, Isfahan, and IRGC command centers. Unlike previous surgical strikes, President Trump was explicitly calling for the toppling of the Iran regime, urging the Iranian public to take over their government. It is worth noting that in a shock to Western planners, Saudi Arabia has refused to allow its airspace and bases to be used for these strikes. Despite Saudi Arabia's refusal to help the US and its ambition to remain neutral, Iran launched drone and missile strikes against the refinery in the country and the US embassy in Riyadh on March 2nd and 3rd. Following these strikes, Riyadh has stated that it reserves the right to respond, suggesting that the policy of absolute neutrality may be shifting towards active defense as its infrastructure is targeted anyway. As of Tuesday, March the 3rd, the estimated casualties are already in the thousands. Iran has an estimated more than 4,500 casualties, military and civilian, including the girls' school tragedy. Israel has reported 120 plus casualties, mostly from the initial Iranian saturation waves. Gulf states, that is the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, have reported more than 150 casualties, mainly at airport hubs and energy sites. And Iraq and Syria, on their side, have suffered more than 400 casualties, mostly Proxy militia members and collateral civilian hits. These numbers are estimated, of course, and they are expected to increase as the war goes on. In total, 16 countries have already been involved in this war. The conflict has drawn in nations through direct combat, hosting US assets, or territorial violations. So the US and Israel and Iran are the primary combatants. The United Kingdom has been involved after Iran struck their bases in Cyprus. Iraq has also been a battleground and launch site. Syria has suffered from Israeli and US strikes on IRGC assets. Lebanon has seen the Hezbollah and Israel fight at the border. In Yemen, Houthi insurgents have declared their support to Iran and their intention to stop any ship passing through the Red Sea nearby. Jordan has intercepted missiles and violation of its airspace. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait have been the targets because of their hosting of US military capabilities. And as mentioned before, Cyprus has been attacked, and especially the UK base there. And Egypt is also impacted because of the Houthis' attacks on the Red Sea and the impact on the Suez Canal. The main strikes so far include the precision decapitation strike via F-35 on Tehran and especially Khamenei's compound. It resulted in the total destruction of the compound, the death of Ali Khamenei, and most likely his son, Mojtaba, although there was no official confirmation yet. Iran launched multiple ballistic missiles that were intercepted by Patriot and THAAD systems against an airbase in Qatar, which caused minimal structural damage to runways, and 12 US personnel were injured during the scramble. Iranian drone swarm and missiles were sent against Dubai International Airport, supposedly in a mishit, but it could be argued that the airport was the target. Terminal 3, as a result, was severely damaged. All civilian flights were suspended indefinitely, and it is estimated that 45 civilians died. There was a ballistic missile strike on Hamad International Airport in Doha, which set the fuel depot on fire and caused massive disruption to global transit, as well as more than 20 casualties. Iranian missiles targeted as well US consulate and base in Erbil, northern Iraq, which caused heavy damage to the civilian neighborhoods near the base, and 8 civilians were killed. There was also a massive saturation wave of more than 300 drones and missiles targeting southern Israel, overwhelmed the Iron Dome and hit multiple residential blocks, causing more than 60 Israeli casualties. Finally, during the US-Israeli strikes in Iran, a girls' school was targeted, killing more than 100, mostly children. The US military also effectively neutralized the Iranian Navy. President Trump and US Central Command confirmed the destruction of at least 9 major warships, including a recently commissioned drone carrier, a forward-based ship, the Iris Makran, and several Jamaran-class corvettes. These precision strikes have decimated Iran's ability to project power and enforce its threatened closure of the Strait of Hormuz via its navy, although Iran could still use land-based missiles and drones. The Trump administration's justification for Operation Epic Fury has been a moving target, often shifting between narrow technical goals and sweeping geopolitical cleansing. In the leading to March 2026 strikes, Trump explicitly embraced the idea of a new government in Tehran, stating that the regime change is the best thing that could happen and referring to the Venezuelan scenario as a template where leadership is removed but the system is stabilized. At the same time, Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defense, has repeatedly attempted to downplay this, telling reporters on March 2nd that this is not a so-called regime change war. However, he immediately followed this by saying, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it, following reports of the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And G.D. Vance framed the resulting instability as a strategic opening for the Iranian people to take back their country. To the UN, the administration cited Article 51, the self-defense article, claiming an imminent threat to US bases. To his base, Trump and Hegseth have framed the war as a way to finish a 47-year-long conflict that began with the 1979 hostage crisis. Hegseth explicitly stated, "We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we're finishing it." This shifts the justification from a specific modern threat to a general setting of historical scores. The administration also struggled to explain why the war is necessary now if they already solved the problem last year. Because the 2025 claim after the 12-day war in June 2025 was that they had obliterated the Iranian nuclear program to rubble. And now in 2026, they're justifying current strikes by claiming Iran is an imminent nuclear threat. When asked about the contradiction, Hegseth argued that Iran was using a conventional shield of ballistic missiles to lie their way back to a bomb, essentially admitting that the 2025 strikes did not permanently end the program. And this is also what experts at the time were arguing, that the 2025 strikes were likely not enough to simply end that program. The Trump administration is also split on how long this will last and how many Americans will be involved. Hegseth has been firm in saying this is not Iraq, this is not endless. He has promised that there will be no nation building or no democracy building exercise. However, on March 1st, Trump told the New York Post that he does not have the yips regarding boots on the ground and refused to rule out a ground invasion if the current air campaign doesn't result in a total capitulation. To better understand why we have reached this point, let's explore the history of this conflict and structural factors enhancing tensions. Before 1979, Iran and Israel were actually tacit allies under the Shah's periphery doctrine, non-Arab states working together to counter Arab nationalism. Everything changed with the 1979 Islamic Revolution. In the 1980s, Ayatollah Khamenei transformed Iran into a theocratic state aiming to export the Islamist revolution and that viewed the US as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. And the Iran-Iraq War between 1980 and 1988 also involved Saudi Arabia and the US-backed Iraq regime of Saddam Hussein, cemented Iran's view that they were encircled by enemies. After the USSR collapsed and Iraq was weakened by the Gulf War, the conflict moved into the shadows. Israel began targeting Iran's nuclear program while Iran began surrounding Israel with a ring of fire via proxies. The shadow war ended in April 2024 when Iran launched its first direct missile attack on its own soil towards Israel, and it led to the first direct confrontation between Iran and Israel. This escalated into a 12-day war in June 2025 when American and Israeli jets crippled many of Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran's primary defense strategy has always been asymmetric warfare, using local forces to keep the fight away from Iranian soil. So the Hezbollah in Lebanon is the crown jewel of this strategy. It is heavily armed with precision missiles and serves as Iran's primary deterrent against an Israeli invasion. Next, we have the Houthis in Yemen. They provide Iran's control over the Red Sea shipping lanes, which are key global shipping lanes, And their 2024-2025 attacks on the global shipping forced the US into a direct naval confrontation. Then we have popular mobilization forces and militias in Iraq and Syria. These groups, like the Kataib Hezbollah, allow Iran to harass US bases in Iraq and maintain a land bridge from Tehran to the Mediterranean. And in Palestine, we have the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Although Gaza is Sunni, they receive Iran funding and training to maintain a constant southern front for Israel. And through these proxies, Iran has been a disruptive force in the region. And while under the Shah, Iran was the policeman of the Gulf and was a Western ally. Even then, it was expansionist, seizing 3 islands from the UAE in 1971, for example. After the Islamic Revolution, Tehran shifted to an ideological mission to topple neighboring monarchies. This led to a brutal 8 years war with Iraq and the birth of the Hezbollah in Lebanon. It perfected the proxy model using local militias to gain veto and destructive power over the governments of Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, and beyond. With the shadow war ending and the successive Israeli and US strikes against Iran's proxy, its network has been battered, making the regime more desperate and unpredictable. The shadow war ended in April 2024 and was followed by US-Israeli strikes on Iran's proxy network over the past 2 years, making the regime more desperate and unpredictable. Another aspect of Iran's influence in the region is its leadership over the Shia population. The division between Sunni and Shia Muslims is a 1,400 years old schism originating from a 7th century dispute over who should succeed Prophet Muhammad. But it is rarely just about theological differences. It is heavily influenced by power politics, particularly following the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the 2003 Iraq War. The Sunni-Shia aspect of this conflict isn't necessarily just about theology, it's also about legitimacy and leadership. In this context, Bahrain is a sensitive flashpoint. Bahrain has a Shia majority, but is ruled by a Sunni monarchy. Iran has long claimed Bahrain as its 14th province, and as recently as February 2026, Bahraini officials reported Iranian maritime kidnappings of sailors and ongoing support for the Al-Ashtar brigades to destabilize the government. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is at the heart of Iran's rivalry over who leads the Islamic world. While they entered a conditional detente between 2023 to 2025, the 2026 reality is one of armed neutrality. Saudi Arabia fears that any internal collapse of Iran would send millions of refugees and militants across the border. Iran's neighbor faced 3 major threats that have nothing to do with religion. First, the narco war. Jordan is currently on the front line of an effort to stop narco trafficking. Since the fall of the Assad regime in late 2024, Iran-backed militias in southern Syria have pivoted to high-tech smuggling. In early 2026, Jordan intercepted hundreds of drones carrying Captagon, a synthetic stimulant, and weapons. Jordan views this as a deliberate attempt by Tehran to fund its proxies and rot the social fabric of Sunni states from the inside. There is also a war over water with Afghanistan. One of the most violent non-sectarian conflicts is between Shia Iran and Sunni Taliban over the Helmand River. Both countries are facing catastrophic droughts, and Afghanistan's dam building has choked off water to eastern Iran. In 2024 and 2026, this led to lethal border skirmishes. It proves that Iran's most immediate threat isn't always the West, it's the basic survival of its provinces. And then there is a sovereignty struggle with Iraq and Pakistan. Iran continues to destabilize regimes in neighboring countries. Iran treats Iraq as a strategic buffer. In 2026, Tehran is aggressively pushing for the return of pro-Iran hardliner to ensure Iraq remains an economic lung to bypass international sanctions. In Pakistan, tensions in Balochistan, the Pakistani region bordering Iran, peaked in early 2026. Both countries host insurgent groups that cross the border. After a series of massive Balochistan Liberation Army attacks in January 2026, Pakistan has accused Iran of failing to police or even quietly encouraging these groups to keep Islamabad off balance. The first consequence of this US-Israeli intervention is that the Iran regime is in crisis. As of now, under the Iranian constitution, a 3-person council has been formed to manage the state until a permanent successor is chosen. The council consists of Masoud Pezeshkian, the moderate president, Gholam Hossein Mohseni Beji, the hardline head of the judiciary, and Ali Reza Arafi, a senior cleric and deputy chairman of the Assembly of Experts. This council faces an immediate crisis as Israel claims a majority of Iran's senior military leadership, including the IRGC commander and the Armed Force Chief of Staff, were killed in the same strike that took out Khamenei. The permanent successor will be chosen by the Assembly of Experts, a body of 88 senior clerics. However, the process is complicated by several factors. The candidate must be approved by the Guardian Council, which is notorious for disqualifying anyone deemed insufficiently loyal to the regime's core ideology. The key contenders for Supreme Leader are Mojtaba Khamenei. He's the son of the late leader. He is rumored, though, to have died alongside his father. In any case, he has deep ties with the IRGC, but would face opposition from those who believe that hereditary succession contradicts the Republic's founding principles. Ali Reza Arafi is an ultimate insider who sits on the Transition Council, the Guardian Council, and leads the seminary system. And Mohammad Mehdi Mirbaheri, he is a leader of the ultra-conservative wing. And finally, Hassan Khamenei, the grandson of the original Supreme Leader, viewed as a less hardline option. So with the formal leadership in flux, the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps, the IRGC, is expected to be the true power broker behind the scenes. Despite losing top generals, the IRGC controls the Basij, the domestic paramilitary force, and vast sectors of the Iranian economy. Their primary goal is to guard the revolution by preventing fragmentation and ensuring that the new leader aligns with their security-driven interests. Despite calls from US President Donald Trump for the Iranian people to overthrow the government and for the IRGC to defect, there is a lack of organized opposition. Unlike the 2024, Iran lacks a structured domestic political infrastructure or military force ready to seize power. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, is a prominent opposition figure in exile with potential external support. But there are no current signs of mass defections or street-level revolution within Iran to install him. The regime is moving quickly to signal continuity, but the unprecedented loss of both its spiritual head and military high command has created a power vacuum that favors the most conservative or security-focused factions. And there are also global consequences of this war. First, the destabilization of the region. Insecurity spreads, and in this case, it is spreading fast, with Iran targeting US and Israeli capabilities across the region. A cornered Iran can use its proxies in many countries to retaliate, which can further escalate the conflict. Gas prices are expected to rise. Nearly 20% of global oil consumption, including crude, condensate, and fuel, goes through the Hormuz Strait that Iran's borders on one side. It is possible for Iran to target ships and effectively close the strait. On the Red Sea path leading to the Suez Canal, ships cross along the Yemen shore and can be targeted by the Houthis rebels that have been financed and supported for years by Iran. This is again a strategic point for international trade, with approximately 12% to 15% of total global trade passing through the area, including over 30% of global container traffic passing through the Suez Canal annually. Iran's supporting countries, Russia and China, will likely see here another blow to the international status quo and a reason to continue their own pursuit of regional hegemony and military capabilities to safeguard their interests against US interventionism. The impact on nuclear proliferation is mostly uncertain. It could be seen as a threat to any country developing nuclear weapons. At the same time, this could also demonstrate that short of having these weapons of mass destruction, no state is secure from a superpower's agenda. It is worth noting that North Korea has been developing both nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles over the past years, with credible reports indicated that it has a version of both. But North Korea is protected by a mutual defense agreement with China and is the only country with whom Beijing has such an accord. There's a high risk that the regime change desired by the US and Israel won't lead to a democratic transition, but to an IRGC stand. With the decapitation of the clerical leadership, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, which already controls roughly 40% of Iran's economy, may simply drop the religious veneer and establish a direct military junta. A military-led Iran might be even more unpredictable than a clerical one, as it would lack the theological constraints of previous leaderships and be focused entirely on survival through brute force and asymmetric global terror. The Iran-led axis of resistance with the Hezbollah, PMF in Iraq, and the Houthis has historically been the primary boots-on-the-ground force fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the Levant. If the Iranian nerve center collapses, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria will likely fracture or retreat to defend their own neighborhoods. This creates an immediate power vacuum in the Badia Desert and eastern Syria, where ISIS remnants have been regrouping since 2024. We could see a repeat of the 2014 crisis, where Sunni extremist groups seized territory amidst the chaos of collapsing Shia regional order. And another consequence is Iran's Unit 42 cyber corps is expected to target global aviation and financial hubs. We are already seeing the paralysis of regional aviation in Dubai and Qatar due to GPS spoofing and direct hacks. A successful cyber strike on major Western stock exchange or a clearinghouse, like SWIFT, for example, could be the asymmetric response that Iran uses to inflict a cost of war directly to the American or European publics without even firing a bullet on their shores. And finally, Iran has a population of 93 million people, nearly 4 times that of Syria. Unlike the surgical nuclear strikes of June 2025, Operation Epic Fury is targeting state institutions. If the central government in Tehran stop functioning and say water and power grids fail, analysts project a refugee wave that would dwarf any seen in modern history. So in conclusion, Iran's revengeful attacks targeting countries across the region, and not only military installations, but also skylines and civilian infrastructures, leaves the region facing a difficult choice: getting embarked in the US-Israeli war with Iran, or remain passive and risk damaging their carefully made images. Questions can also be raised about how to prevent such an attack in the future, when the US had been amassing massive capabilities in the region, and everyone was talking about a potential intervention on Iran, and yet no one managed to stop it. But one thing is certain: a regime is hardly changed by air power alone. And this regime particularly is well established. It has gone through different leaders, and it is more than likely that it will reorganize around a new leader. Sending troops on the ground would be the way to, over a longer period of time, initiate a comprehensive regime change. And if it's not that type of prolonged war, then what exactly is the US doing? What is also worrying is that Iran seems to want to involve as many countries as possible in the region and beyond, which could escalate the war massively. But getting more adversaries seems to be an odd calculation on Tehran's side. Iran's goal here might be to make the cost of the war so high that the international community eventually forces the US and Israel to stop. They aren't necessarily trying to win, they are trying to make sure that nobody wins. While the US and Israel have achieved a surgical victory by removing the top leadership, it might have created a power vacuum, and who knows who will be filling it. The results could be even more catastrophic for both the Iranian people and the region. And that's why the US and Israel needed a proper plan before going in. But what I found most worrying in this situation is the fact that Iran has launched strikes against so many countries, because this could really trigger a domino effect and escalate the war. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you very soon in the next video.